He shouldn't have made it. A German shepherd, ribs showing through a coat caked in blood and desert dust, dragging his shattered paw across the gates of a U.S. Marine base outside Las Cruces, New Mexico. Strapped to his back with fraying cords was a little girl, unconscious, her skin burned by the sun, her lips cracked from silence. They didn't come in through the road. They came through the wire. No one saw them approach. No one could believe what the cameras recorded. But this dog wasn't running from wild animals. He was fleeing the people who wore badges, the ones who called it protection. What you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a reckoning, a prayer, and a bond forged in the fires of betrayal. Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. And if you believe a dog's loyalty can move heaven itself, hit that subscribe button. Because this one will haunt you in the best way. The wind howled across the outskirts of Las Cruces, New Mexico, dragging veils of dust across the baked earth like shrouds. The desert was brutal that spring. Sunlight sharp as razors by day, freezing wind like dry ice by night. Just past dawn, with the air still heavy from a night of dry thunder, Camp Howler, an isolated U.S. Marine training facility surrounded by sandstone cliffs and mesquite scrub, was slowly stirring awake. Reveille had not yet sounded. The base was half asleep, the kind of quiet reserved for moments just before history decides to knock. It wasn't a knock. It was a noise like scraping, like something dragging across concrete. Then, a bark. Guttural, hoarse, full of pain. At the southern gate, unmanned at this hour but monitored by surveillance, the motion alert flickered on. A corporal sipping weak coffee in the monitoring shack blinked at the grainy feed, confused. Then he hit the red button. Within minutes, the alert reached Lieutenant Sawyer Maddox. Sawyer had the hard edge of a man shaped by too many deployments and not enough homecomings. He stood 6'2", lean but tightly coiled, his jaw a map of old tension. Deep-set gray eyes always scanning for threats, never quite at rest. He wore the desert camo like it was part of his skin. At 34, he was the kind of Marine who didn't believe in miracles, only in firepower and discipline. That morning, he was headed toward the mess hall when the call came through. "Sir, there's a dog at the gate. You'll want to see this." When Sawyer reached the gate, he didn't speak at first. No one did. The dog was a German shepherd, larger than most, but emaciated. His fur, once likely a regal sable, was patchy and dull, matted with blood, dirt, and something black and chemical-smelling. His left hind leg dragged uselessly. But what froze every Marine on duty was what was strapped to his back. A little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7. Her skin was ghostly pale beneath layers of grime. She wore a torn pink t-shirt and mismatched socks, her lips cracked, one eye swollen shut. Her arms hung limp like broken branches. She was tied to the dog's back with what looked like strips of an old towel and shoelaces. The dog growled weakly as Sawyer stepped forward, a sound of raw defiance, even as he trembled and sank to the ground. "Get Doc Whitlock here," Sawyer snapped, already unhooking his canteen. "Now!" Faye Whitlock arrived seconds later, sprinting barefoot across the gravel in navy blue scrubs. She was in her late 20s, short and wiry, with a messy brown bun and the haunted, overworked eyes of someone who'd seen too much too soon. She had been a trauma doctor in Chicago before joining the Marines, after her brother, also a Marine, had taken his own life post-deployment. Since then, she had refused to stay idle, transferring to Camp Howler's remote base because, as she put it, someone's got to clean up the mess no one else wants to see. Faye knelt beside the dog, brushing back the girl's sweat-stuck hair. Her fingers found a pulse, thready but alive. The dog didn't bite her. He simply stared, eyes amber and bottomless, as if gauging whether this woman could be trusted. Then, with a soft exhale, he collapsed entirely. They carried the girl to the infirmary, and the dog followed, barely conscious but dragging himself after her, unwilling to be separated. Inside the sterile white walls of the medical tent, Faye and 2 corpsmen began treating the girl. She had 3 broken ribs, signs of dehydration, and multiple bruises at various stages of healing. But what chilled Faye was the long cut across the girl's back, precise, surgical, as if done by someone who knew anatomy. Sawyer stood in the corner, fists clenched. "Who the hell would do this to a kid?" "She's not just a victim," Faye said grimly. "She's a message." As the girl was stabilized, the dog never moved from her bedside. When anyone tried to touch her, he growled. Not in rage, but warning, protective. One of the younger corpsmen tried to leash him. It didn't go well. "Let him be," Sawyer said. "He's earned it." No one knew where they had come from. Not a single alert had been tripped, but the dog, Faye scanned him closely, had a faded military tattoo on his ear, and a scar under the fur on his flank, long and curved, like from a blade. She reached for the scanner. Beep. "Atlas," she murmured, reading the registry. K901972. Status: deceased. Officially retired and lost in action 3 years ago. "Atlas," Sawyer repeated slowly, eyes narrowing. "That was Blaine's dog." "Who's Blaine?" "Sergeant Noah Blaine," Sawyer said. "Used to be stationed here. Quiet guy. Too smart for his own good. One day he just vanished during a joint op. Command said he went AWOL." "But he wasn't alone when he disappeared, was he?" Faye asked. Sawyer shook his head. He had his dog. And now the dog was back, with a girl. The girl stirred. Her voice was a whisper. "Atlas." Faye knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart. You're safe now. Can you tell us your name?" The girl blinked at her, struggling to keep her eyes open. Her voice barely formed the word. "Riley." Sawyer stepped closer, his voice soft but steady. "Who did this to you, Riley?" She closed her eyes. Her lips moved, but the words were silent. Only Atlas reacted. He raised his head, ears flicking toward the corner of the tent. Then, after a long pause, he laid it back down and let out a soft whine. Sawyer Maddox stood in the darkened hallway outside the infirmary, arms crossed, his jaw stiff. Morning had fully risen, but the desert outside remained hushed, like even the coyotes didn't want to disturb the silence that followed the arrival of Atlas and the girl. Riley was sleeping now, under sedation. Atlas had curled beside her bed like a shadow, too still, too quiet, but his eyes never closing for long. There was something deliberate about the way the dog watched, like he was waiting for something or someone to appear again. Sawyer didn't believe in signs, but he knew a pattern when he saw one. Back in the command office, he pulled up the old personnel file, Sergeant Noah Blaine, a name he hadn't spoken aloud in 3 years. Blaine had been an odd fit for the Corps. Book-smart, soft-spoken, unusually empathetic. A tall, broad-shouldered man with perpetually tousled dark hair, and a stare that seemed to weigh the soul. He'd joined the Marines late, at 28, after a brief academic career in behavioral psychology. Some said he'd been trying to run from something, a sister who disappeared, a fiancé who left without explanation, but no one knew for sure. What Sawyer remembered most was that Blaine had treated Atlas like an equal, not a tool. He trained the dog differently. They understood each other in ways that unnerved command. 3 years ago, during a joint humanitarian mission in Arizona, Blaine and Atlas had vanished. Their transport was logged as returning without incident, but neither man nor dog was ever seen again. Command declared him AWOL after 3 days. The file was sealed. Rumors, of course, had flown. One suggested Blaine discovered something he shouldn't have. Another, darker one, said he'd lost control and gone rogue. Now, Atlas was back, and strapped to his spine was a girl who knew his name. Sawyer hit the intercom. "Lieutenant Whitlock, update?" Faye's voice came over, weary but focused. "Vitals are stable. She's resting. No signs of internal bleeding. I cleaned and sutured the laceration on her back. Atlas hasn't left her side. I need to talk to her when she wakes up." "You'll need to be careful," Faye added. "That child has been through hell." "I know," Sawyer said, and he meant it. He'd seen that look in other kids, the ones pulled from villages after raids, too shell-shocked to cry. Outside the infirmary, a new face arrived, Corporal Mason Rudd, the youngest in Sawyer's command. At just 22, Mason had a wiry build, restless blue eyes, and a constant twitch in his fingers, like he always wanted to be holding something, usually a wrench or a rifle. He was from a scrapyard town in Kentucky, raised by a single father who worked in demolition and taught Mason to recognize structural weaknesses in both buildings and people. "Sir," Mason said, approaching with a tablet, "you're going to want to see this. I pulled satellite footage from the last 12 hours. On the screen, just a few hours earlier, the southern perimeter, allegedly secured, showed a small figure weaving through a breach in the wire fencing. Not an entry point, a blind spot. The girl and the dog had made it through without triggering sensors. She knew the hole was there, Mason muttered. That means someone else showed her. Or him, Sawyer said, staring at Atlas on the footage. This dog knew his way around the grid. You think he remembered? Mason asked. I think he never forgot. Later that afternoon, Riley awoke. Faye had gently introduced herself again, offering water in small sips and speaking in calm, simple tones. The girl blinked up at her, hesitant, but less afraid than before. Faye took that as a small victory. Sawyer entered quietly, removing his cap as a gesture of respect. Riley's eyes went to him immediately, sizing him up the way children do when they've been hurt too many times to assume safety. I'm Sawyer, he said, voice even. I'm not here to scare you. I just want to understand. Riley didn't respond right away. She looked to Atlas, who was watching Sawyer too, and after a moment of silent exchange, she gave the slightest nod. Where did you come from? Sawyer asked softly. Do you remember how you got here? Riley opened her mouth, but no sound came. Her hand moved toward her neck, where a faded bruise ran across the skin like a forgotten necklace. Faye's heart clenched. She may not be ready, Faye said, but then Riley pointed. To Atlas. He brought me, she whispered. I know, Sawyer said. Do you know his name? She nodded. Atlas. He told me. Faye looked at Sawyer, brows lifted. Riley's statement was literal. He told me. Sawyer didn't question it. Not then. Did someone hurt you? He asked. Riley nodded again, slower this time. Do you remember who? She hesitated. Then, they said it was a game. A game? Hide and seek, she said, almost mechanically. But the ones who lose, they don't come back. Silence fell like a thunderclap. That night, Sawyer sat in the empty mess hall, staring at an untouched tray of food. Outside, the wind kicked up again. He was halfway through rereading Blaine's incident report when Mason burst in, holding a dusty green duffel bag. Sir, Mason said breathlessly, you told me to search the storage units. I found this in the old K9 kennel block, locker 17. Sawyer opened it. Inside were photos, a training log, and at the bottom, a sealed envelope. It was addressed to anyone who still gives a damn. He opened it. Blaine's handwriting, scrawled and frantic. If Atlas made it back, it means I didn't. The people running this? They're military adjacent, contractors, private, dirty. They're taking kids from shelters under fake protection programs and moving them through facilities buried under old bases. I got Riley out. I couldn't get the others. If she's alive, follow the coordinates on the next page. That's where they're moving them. I trained Atlas for this. He remembers. If you're reading this, you're the only one left who might care. Blaine. Sawyer stared at the page, heart pounding. On the back, there were GPS coordinates. They pointed to a decommissioned mining zone 40 miles south of Las Cruces. Sawyer stood slowly. We've got a lead. Night fell with unsettling stillness over Camp Howler. The desert winds had died down, leaving a silence so complete it pressed on the windows like a held breath. Inside the briefing room, fluorescent lights hummed softly as Lieutenant Sawyer Maddox paced between dusty maps and a corkboard covered with hastily pinned notes. A red string now connected a satellite image of an abandoned mining zone to the printed coordinates from Blaine's letter. 40 miles south. No roads, no drones allowed, restricted airspace under the guise of environmental hazards. It reeked of misdirection. At the long table, Faye Whitlock sat flipping through Blaine's training logs. Her dark eyes scanned with practiced urgency, though exhaustion showed in the lines around her mouth. She wore a gray hoodie over scrubs now, sleeves pushed up, revealing a faint scar across her left wrist, one she never talked about. Her history in Chicago had taught her the price of trust, but in the past 36 hours, she'd found herself trusting Sawyer in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since her brother. He didn't just train Atlas for obedience, she said quietly. Look at this. He designed scent trails, response puzzles, even emotional trigger recognition. This dog was built to think, not just react. Built to remember, Sawyer muttered, staring at the map. There was a knock, then Corporal Mason Rudd entered, carrying a tray with 3 steaming mugs. His shaggy blonde hair was tucked under a crooked baseball cap now, and he wore fatigue pants with a hoodie that said, Fort Irwin Beer Mile, Runner Up. He handed one cup to Faye, another to Sawyer, then sat down with the third, his leg bouncing. Perimeter's quiet, he said, But you're not gonna like this. We got a visitor. Sawyer's brow lifted. Who? She's FBI. Knew your name. Said she's following a pattern of missing kids across 3 states. Wants to talk to Riley. The room fell silent for a beat. Faye looked at Sawyer, tension in her shoulders. What's her name? Mason scratched the back of his neck. Agent Lennox, and she doesn't look like the patient type. 5 minutes later, Agent Joelle Lennox stepped into the tent. She was tall, lean, and visibly unimpressed by military formality. Her jet-black pantsuit was spotless, her dark hair tied into a tight knot, and her badge glinted from beneath her lapel. Her skin was pale but flushed from the heat, and her eyes, hazel with a flick of gold, were sharp, clinical. I was expecting less paperwork and more action, she said by way of introduction. We're working with limited resources, Sawyer replied evenly. Lennox eyed the map. This mining zone, Carrate Ridge, was closed in 1984, supposedly due to radon contamination. But 3 weeks ago, 2 foster siblings vanished 20 miles from there. 6 days ago, a truck registered to a shell company passed through Las Cruces without stopping for fuel or checkpoints. And now, a military K-9 previously declared dead returns with a child who names him like a friend. That's not coincidence. That's design. Sawyer folded his arms. Then, we're on the same page. I want to speak to the girl, Lennox said. Faye stepped forward, arms crossed. She's not ready, and she trusts us, not you. I don't need trust, Lennox said coolly. I need intel. Sawyer raised a hand. If she gives anything, it'll be because she chooses to. Lennox studied him a moment, then nodded. 12 hours. That's all I'll wait. When she left, Faye exhaled through her teeth. She's not here for rescue. She's here for headlines. She's not the only one watching, Sawyer said. Later that night, Sawyer found Riley on the infirmary cot, curled beside Atlas like a leaf pressed to bark. The dog was awake, ears flicking slightly as Sawyer approached. Riley looked up, clutching a stuffed bear someone had found in the base's donation bin. I remember more, she whispered. Sawyer crouched beside the bed. You don't have to push. No, I want to. Because they will come back for me. Or for the others. She held out her arm. A faint scar ran from wrist to elbow. Clean, straight. Too straight for an accident. They put something in, she said. What do you mean? She reached under her shirt and pulled out a bandage. Beneath it, on her left side, was a tiny incision. Not fresh, but not fully healed. Faye entered just then, her eyes catching the motion. She approached slowly. Sweetheart, may I look? Riley nodded. With practiced hands, Faye cleaned the area. Then she took the portable ultrasound scanner and pressed it gently to Riley's ribs. The screen blinked. Static. Then, something. What the hell? Faye whispered. It was a chip. Not just a locator, some kind of biometric tracker. And next to it, deeper, a tiny black speck the scanner couldn't identify. She's tagged, Sawyer said flatly. Worse, Faye replied. She's mapped. Blaine's letter said they were using shelters, Mason added from the door. What if they're also marking which ones are viable based on DNA, health, obedience? Sawyer stood. We have to get to that mine, now. But Riley shook her head. It's not just a mine. It's a place with no stars, no echoes. What do you mean? Faye asked. They don't let sound leave, Riley said. Even when you scream. The words hung in the air like smoke. Sawyer turned to Atlas. The dog's eyes were fixed on the door now, ears alert. He knows the way, Sawyer said. We leave before dawn. The first streaks of dawn cracked across the Mazzia horizon as Lieutenant Sawyer Maddox secured the final strap on his gear. The desert air still held its nighttime chill, but heat shimmered just beyond the ridge, waiting. Camp Howler stood quieter than usual, most of the base still asleep, except for a few guards patrolling the perimeter. The mission wasn't official. It wasn't sanctioned. But for Sawyer, it was already past the point of protocol. The Humvee idled in front of the supply garage. Corporal Mason Rudd stood beside it, a carbine slung across his shoulder and a half-eaten protein bar in his hand. His eyes, usually jittery, were focused this morning, serious. He wore a tactical vest that looked too big for his frame, but moved with the ease of someone who had worn it long enough to forget it was there. Loaded and ready, he said. In the back seat, Atlas sat alert, muzzle twitching. He had been uncharacteristically restless all night, pacing the edge of the infirmary until Riley reached out and laid her hand on his back. Only then did he calm. The dog now wore a lightweight vest embedded with a microcam and a side pouch that carried Blaine's original training chip, though Sawyer wasn't entirely sure what it held. Faye Whitlock approached, zipping up her black field jacket. She'd ditched the scrubs for cargo pants and a dusty gray tactical kit, borrowed from the base's emergency stock. Her hair, normally tied, hung loose in the morning wind. Despite the exhaustion around her eyes, she looked calm, centered. The scar on her wrist peaked just beneath the cuff of her glove, a silent reminder of who she'd been before the uniform. "I dosed Riley with a mild sedative," she said, climbing into the passenger seat. "She shouldn't wake for a few hours. Lennox is watching her." "You trust Lennox?" Sawyer asked. "No," Faye replied, "but I trust Riley to know when to scream." They drove out as the sun broke the line of mountains behind them, casting long golden light across the sand. The journey to Carite Ridge took nearly 2 hours over uneven terrain. Roads faded to gravel, then to dust, and finally to nothing. The coordinates led them beyond the last fence line, through rusted-out power stations and long abandoned mining infrastructure. Carite Ridge wasn't a ridge at all. It was a scar, a collapsed quarry that opened into jagged cliffs and crumbled roads, surrounded by scorched mesquite and rusting gateposts. A warning sign hung sideways from a single bolt. "Danger, radon risk, do not enter." They parked beside what had once been a ranger shack, now no more than a frame of burned wood and collapsed ceiling. Atlas leapt from the vehicle before Sawyer opened the door, nose low, tail stiff. He moved with purpose, ignoring the debris and old fences. "He's got something," Mason said. The dog led them past the quarry's rim, down a slope hidden by thorn bushes. The air changed there, still and heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. At the base of the slope, half buried beneath rocks, was a steel hatch, rusted but intact. Sawyer and Mason pulled it open with effort, revealing a stairwell that descended into pitch darkness. "Non-reg installation," Sawyer muttered. "This wasn't on any map." "Blaine knew," Faye said. "He trained Atlas for this." They descended slowly, flashlights cutting through decades of dust and rot. The tunnel walls were lined with aged wiring and cracked cement. After 20 feet, they reached a large iron door. Atlas paused, then whined softly and pawed at it. Mason stepped forward and tested the handle. It was unlocked. Beyond it lay a corridor, narrow and low-ceilinged, lined with rooms. Some held filing cabinets, others were empty, but smelled of bleach and metal. One room, padded and soundproofed, had no door handle from the inside. Faye's stomach churned. This was never a mine. Atlas led them further, to a security gate, disabled, possibly by time, possibly by Blaine. Behind it, they found the main chamber. It looked like a classroom at first, small desks, blank whiteboards, crates filled with notebooks and files, a line of beds against the wall, children's sizes. Mason moved toward the papers, flipping one open. Names, ages, notes on behavior. "Assessments," Sawyer said. "Compliance, obedience, emotional response." At the back of the room was a glass window, blackened from the inside. Faye found a side door and led them through. Inside was a lab. Modern, intact. Sterile trays lined the counters, DNA charts on the wall, coolers with vials labeled by code, and in one corner, a desk with a monitor still glowing faint blue. "Someone's been here recently," Mason whispered. A folder sat on the desk. The name on the cover read, Subject 7A, Riley May Clark. Faye opened it with shaking hands. Photos, lab notes, biometric scans. "She was next," Faye said. "They were prepping her for transfer." At that moment, Atlas growled, a low, rolling warning. He backed toward the hall, hackles raised. "Someone's coming," Sawyer said. "Lights off. Quiet." They shut down flashlights and ducked into the shadows as footsteps echoed through the tunnel. 2 figures appeared, both armed, both in dark fatigues without insignia. Mercenaries. One tall and bearded, with a long scar across his left cheek. The other lean, twitchy, younger. "Boss said sweep the lab," Scarface muttered. "Clear it, torch it." Before the second man could reply, Atlas lunged from the dark. Chaos erupted. The young one screamed as Atlas tackled him, knocking his weapon aside. Sawyer and Mason moved fast, suppressors coughing in the dark. The older merc was down in seconds. The the second barely conscious. Faye pulled Atlas back. He was bleeding from his shoulder, grazed, but not seriously. "Status?" Sawyer barked. "Clear," Mason replied, zip-tying the survivor. They dragged the living mercenary to a chair and doused him with water. "You're going to tell me where the others are," Sawyer said coldly. "Too late," the man coughed. "They're already moving. New shipment, base north of Las Palomas. We're just cleanup." Faye slammed a fist into the wall. "They knew we were coming." Sawyer's voice dropped. "Someone tipped them off." Dust clung to everything as they drove back across the dry flats outside Kerite Ridge. The desert sun had risen high now, unforgiving, throwing hard light across the shattered landscape. Inside the Humvee, the mood was brittle. Raw silence held between the occupants, only broken by the occasional wince when the road jolted Atlas's injured shoulder. He lay curled in the back beside Mason, one eye half closed, the other still sharp, tracking the road as if trying to memorize each curve in case he needed to return alone. Sawyer drove with both hands on the wheel, his jaw locked, sweat trailing down his temples. His thoughts weren't on the road. They were on Riley, alone back at Camp Howler, and the fact that their presence at the ridge had been anticipated. Someone new, someone close. Beside him, Faye had gone pale since reading the notes in Riley's file. She held the folder tight to her chest like a weapon and stared out the window. Her voice, when it came, was low and brittle. They were monitoring her emotional response to pain. Sawyer didn't respond. Faye turned toward him. "That's not science, that's ritual. We stop it. All of it," Sawyer said. The only piece missing was how. Back at the base, Agent Joelle Lennox was waiting. She stood at the edge of the helipad with arms crossed, wearing desert-ready fatigues instead of her usual suit. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice snapped the tension like glass. "You didn't report your departure. And you didn't secure the base," Sawyer shot back, cutting the engine. Lennox narrowed her eyes. "What happened?" They brought her into the briefing room, away from Riley, who was still sleeping under sedation. Faye placed the files and photos on the table, evidence of the facility, medical records, lab charts. Lennox flipped through them silently, her face hardening by degrees. "That's enough for federal warrant," she said. "I'll mobilize Homeland and Child Protective Services now." "It's too late," Sawyer said. "They're already moving the kids north." Mason added, "Las Palomas. The merc we captured said there's a site there." Lennox looked at him for the first time. "You trust the word of a half-conscious gun for hire?" "We trust the dog," Faye said quietly. Atlas reacted before the man even opened his mouth. At that, Lennox sat back and nodded. "Then we don't wait." A plan came together fast, improvised from the tools at hand. Camp Howler's satellite access gave them a faint heat signature on the edge of a retired Air Force munitions depot, 25 miles northeast of Las Palomas. No scheduled activity, no flight paths, and yet the infrared showed multiple vehicles arriving at dawn. They would need backup. And so, Lennox made a call. Within hours, 2 Blackhawks arrived, kicking sand into violent cyclones as they touched down behind the motor pool. One carried a 3-person special tactics team from Holloman Air Force Base, all in black. The leader, Staff Sergeant Elias Cade, stepped down first. He was solidly built, with copper-brown skin and close-cropped hair, maybe mid-30s, with a distinct limp in his right leg. A jagged scar trailed up from behind his collar to his jaw. His voice, when he spoke, was calm and measured. Someone used to being obeyed but never loud about it. "You Maddox?" he asked. "Yeah." "Cade, I've got 2 sharpshooters, 1 tech, and authorization to operate off-grid for 24 hours. Faye took a second glance at the limp. Cade caught her gaze and smiled faintly. "IED in Helmand. Don't worry, I run better than I look." His team consisted of Sergeant Leon Joe, a compact, alert woman with hawk-like focus and a prosthetic trigger hand, and Corporal Teddy Morales, a lanky radio and drone specialist with shaggy hair and too many tattoos. Joe barely spoke. Morales never stopped. "Is this the famous dog?" Morales asked, kneeling beside Atlas, who regarded him coolly. "Don't try to pet him," Mason warned. "Noted," Morales said, withdrawing his hand like someone stepping out of a minefield. They moved at sundown. 2 choppers, 2 vehicles flanking from the east. The compound near Las Palomas was a concrete relic, an old bomb shelter once meant to survive the Cold War, now repurposed into something colder. As they approached, the desert quiet grew absolute. "We've got thermal movement at the back structure," Morales reported through comms. 8 bodies, at least 3 smaller heat signatures. Kids. "Visual confirmation," Joe whispered from her perch. 2 guards, non-uniformed, armed. Sawyer crouched beside Atlas behind a low ridge, tightening the vest on the dog's chest. The injury hadn't slowed him, only sharpened his posture. "You good?" Sawyer asked. Atlas leaned into him for a second, just enough to feel. Then he turned toward the gate. Faye stayed behind with Morales and a field medic, keeping the extraction zone open. Cade gave the signal. The team split. Mason and Joe took the north entry. Sawyer, Atlas, and Cade moved along the south wall toward the loading dock. As they approached, Atlas stopped and sniffed the air, his whole body going tense. "Tripwire," Cade murmured, spotting the glint of filament near the ground. They bypassed it, and Atlas led them through a side door, already ajar. Inside, the air was wrong. Sterile and cold, despite the desert heat. They moved past crates labeled as HVAC equipment and reached a corridor lit by a single flickering bulb. The sound of soft crying drifted from behind a locked door. Cade took point. "Breaching. 1, 2, 3. The door burst inward. Inside were 2 boys and a girl, none older than 10, chained at the ankle but alive. Their eyes went wide, frightened at first, until they saw Atlas. The girl whispered, "That's him." Sawyer moved fast, keys from the guard's pocket opening shackles. Atlas stayed back, watching the hallway. Then he growled. Footsteps. Joe's voice crackled through comms. "4 targets incoming!" Gunfire erupted. Sawyer shoved the kids behind the lockers. Atlas leapt forward, intercepting the first assailant with terrifying force. Cade took out 2 more with clean shots. Mason's voice barked over comms. "Roof's clear. East exit's open." "Move," Sawyer called. They ran, kids in tow. Outside, a chopper circled low. Faye stood waving from the evac point. As the rotors kicked up sand, one of the boys stumbled. Atlas doubled back, nudging him forward. They made it. Camp Howler shimmered under a high desert sun as the helicopters returned, rotor wash kicking up dust like ghosts rising from the soil. It was early afternoon when the team landed, the heat thick and pressing, but a different kind of weight hung in the air, one made of relief, dread, and quiet victories. 3 children, alive, clutched small military blankets as they were ushered off the transport by medical staff. All were malnourished, bruised, and terrified, but they walked under their own power. That mattered. Faye Whitlock moved among them quickly, kneeling to examine each one with the practiced calm of someone who had seen too many broken children and still believed in fixing what could be mended. She met the gaze of the oldest boy, around 11, pale with auburn hair and narrow shoulders, and gently asked his name. "Jonas," he said hoarsely. "Hi, Jonas. You're safe now," Faye said. "We're going to take care of you." The other 2 were younger, a girl of about 7 with short dreadlocks named Mina, and a mute boy, maybe 6, with a scarred scalp and unblinking gray eyes. He never spoke, but when he saw Atlas, he moved to sit near him instinctively, as though recognizing an old friend. Atlas, still limping from the minor wounds sustained in the raid, lowered himself beside the boy and rested his head on the child's lap. No growling, no resistance, only quiet acceptance. Inside the command tent, Sawyer Maddox paced in front of the makeshift warboard, now crisscrossed with maps, photos, and timelines. His uniform was streaked with dust and sweat, his knuckles scabbed from the earlier engagement. He hadn't stopped moving since the moment they landed. His thoughts were a constant churn. Who had warned the enemy? Where were the rest of the children? And most urgently, what was next? Lennox entered without knocking. She looked different now, less like an agent and more like someone who'd just come off the battlefield. Her black tactical vest was streaked with grime, and a rip along the sleeve revealed a healing cut on her arm. Her voice, however, remained sharp. "We got partial intel from the site. Morales is decrypting now," she said, "but most of it was already torched." "Then someone's still a step ahead," Sawyer muttered. "They're cleaning house." "They're also getting sloppy," Lennox replied. "We found injection kits, same as the one Riley had, but this batch was marked differently, type Delta." Faye, who had just stepped in, paused mid-stride. "Delta?" Lennox turned to her. You've seen that before? Not on a child, Faye said. Back when I was in Chicago, we handled victims of black market drug trials. Delta-class injections were tied to biochemical compliance tests, the kind that didn't leave bruises but rewired response to authority. They're not just abducting, Sawyer said darkly. They're building obedience. Just then, Morales entered, his laptop slung under one arm. The normally talkative corporal looked shaken. He set the computer down and pulled up an audio file. Found this in a hidden archive. You just need to hear it. He hit play. Static. Then a voice, clear, calm, and female. Subject 7A has exceeded expectation. Emotional bond to K901972 is complete. If retrieval fails, terminate K9. Memory anchors will collapse, and subject will be programmable within 72 hours. The file ended. Silence fell. Faye's hand went to her mouth. Sawyer stared at the screen, his fists curling slowly. They built Riley's entire survival mechanism around Atlas, Faye said quietly. If he dies, she loses herself. Lennox's voice was ice. Then they were planning to recover her and destroy him. Sawyer turned to Morales. Where was the file uploaded from? Morales tapped rapidly. That's the thing. It was uploaded remotely from inside our satellite relay. From this base. The room froze. Lennox moved first. You're telling me someone here has been feeding them data? Morales nodded. Encrypted channel, piggybacked off routine surveillance footage. Whoever it is, they know our system better than I do. Sawyer's voice dropped low. How long? 2 weeks, minimum. Outside, the children were being settled into a secured medical wing under round-the-clock watch. Riley, newly awake and aware that other children had been saved, refused to leave their side. She insisted on helping Mina comb out her hair and held the silent boy's hand while he slept. Every so often, she'd glance toward the door, where Atlas waited patiently, his ears occasionally twitching, as if listening to things no one else could hear. That evening, a new character arrived. Captain Delaney Brigg, head of regional logistics for the Southwest Division, landed by chopper with 2 aides. She was in her mid-40s, tall and imposing, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled into a severe bun and thin wire-framed glasses perched on a sharp nose. Her uniform was flawless, her tone clipped, but there was a kindness buried behind the steel in her voice. She met Sawyer at the edge of the tarmac. You disobeyed direct engagement protocols, Lieutenant. We saved children, ma'am, Sawyer replied. Brigg didn't argue, and made enemies who now know where you sleep. Inside the command tent, Brigg was briefed on the mole, the injections, and the layered manipulation surrounding Atlas and Riley. What do you need? She asked finally. Sawyer looked her in the eye. Time, access, and trust. You'll get 2 of the 3, she said, then added after a beat. I'll leave it to you to figure out which. Late that night, Atlas sat beside Riley's bed. Her breathing was slow and even, her hand curled in the fur at his shoulder. Faye sat across the room, pretending to read reports, but her eyes drifted to the dog again and again. Did you know, she said softly to no one, that dogs can smell cortisol, the stress hormone, in human sweat? Atlas lifted his head slightly. You always know, don't you? She asked. He laid his head back down. The desert night over Camp Howler was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet. It wasn't rest. It was the stillness that came before movement, the breath before a strike. The wind had died down hours ago, and now even the cicadas had gone silent. Under the harsh white glow of security floodlights, Sawyer Maddox stood on the perimeter wall, his boots resting on the lip of a lookout post, eyes sweeping the wire fence and the darkness beyond. Something itched at the edge of his instincts. Something was wrong. Inside the operations tent, Corporal Mason Rudd was hunched over a disassembled laptop, his usual jittery energy replaced by a tight coil of tension. Across from him sat Morales, chewing on a pen cap as he stared at network activity logs, tracing packet flows and encrypted timestamps. I'm telling you, the breach wasn't from outside, Morales muttered. They used a back door I didn't even know existed. Whoever this is, they had root access weeks ago. Can you trace it? Mason asked. Morales nodded slowly. I can try, but if I do, they'll know I'm looking. We only get one shot at this. Then take it, Sawyer said as he entered, his tone low. Let them feel someone's watching them for once. In the medical wing, Faye Whitlock finished checking the vitals on the 3 rescued children. Jonas, the oldest, had finally stopped flinching at every sound. Mina had begun speaking in full sentences. The mute boy still hadn't uttered a word, but he had begun to draw strange, precise images of metal rooms, wires, and corridors that seemed too detailed for a child his age. Riley sat beside him now, holding his hand as he shaded in the frame of a door with no handle. "That's the place they kept us before they moved us," she said to Faye. "I never saw outside, but I heard humming through the wall, like engines." Faye studied the drawing. "This door! Do you remember what was on the other side?" The boy hesitated, then nodded. He picked up a red pencil and, with surprising clarity, drew the outline of a man. Not his face, just the silhouette. But the figure had a long coat and a strange device on the wrist. Riley touched the drawing gently. "He called himself Dr. Hayes," she whispered. Faye looked at her. "You met him?" "Only once, but the others, they were scared of him, even the guards. That name didn't appear in any file they had." Faye wrote it down, underlining it twice. Meanwhile, Agent Lennox stood in the shadow of the main comms tower, smoking a cigarette she wasn't supposed to have. Her fingers trembled slightly, though her face betrayed nothing. She hadn't slept in 28 hours, not since Morales had confirmed the mole was feeding information from inside the camp, not since the encrypted audio clip had played. She had trusted too many people before, colleagues, friends, even a superior officer who once told her she reminded him of his daughter. That same man had falsified records in a Chicago trafficking case years ago, and Lennox had buried the truth for too long. Now, the weight of that failure pressed down on her ribs like a hand squeezing the breath from her lungs. She wouldn't repeat it. She dropped the cigarette and crushed it with her boot. Back in the surveillance trailer, the screen suddenly blinked. Morales leaned forward. "Got something." Sawyer appeared behind him. "Talk to me." There's a micro-ping, repeating every 13 seconds, bouncing off a router node inside the restricted maintenance wing. Sawyer frowned. "That building's sealed." "Not anymore," Morales said grimly. "I'm seeing a signal. Right now." The team moved fast. Within minutes, Sawyer, Mason, Lennox, and Faye reached the old maintenance wing, an auxiliary building attached to the northern wall, long since abandoned, and used now only for storage. The door, though locked from the outside, had fresh scrape marks at the bottom. Sawyer signaled. Mason kicked it open. Inside, the dust hung thick in the air, disturbed only recently. Rows of old generators lined one wall. A table had been cleared in the center of the room, where a military laptop sat open and running. A figure stood there, startled, mid-keystroke. It was Staff Sergeant Benton Wells, communications technician, early 40s. Balding, average height, unremarkable in every way, which made him the perfect ghost. He had transferred to Howler 3 months ago, quiet, compliant, low profile. Sawyer had barely exchanged 10 words with him. "Hands up!" Lennox barked. Wells didn't move. Instead, he reached slowly for a device clipped to his belt, a small rectangular transmitter glowing faint green. "Don't!" Sawyer warned. Wells looked up at him. His face was tired, sunken-eyed. "You don't understand what they are," he said quietly. "They're monsters," Faye replied. Wells shook his head. "They're architects. I was just a courier." He pressed the button. The lights died instantly. From somewhere deep inside the base, a distant explosion rocked the ground. Sawyer tackled him, just as the laptop surged with static. Mason dove for the transmitter, slamming his boot onto it. Sparks flew. Lennox secured Wells, who didn't resist, only whispered, "You're too late." Back at the medwing, the shockwave had cracked the outer wall. Riley and the other children were evacuated under the guidance of Staff Sergeant Cade and Joe, who had remained on standby. Cade, his limp barely noticeable under stress, scooped Mina into his arms and barked orders with the calm of a man who had lived through worse. Morales managed to salvage partial data from the laptop before it was fried. One folder remained accessible, Project Helix. Inside were partial logs, coordinates, and a short video. It was Sarah Clark, Riley's mother. The clip showed her in a white-walled room holding a tablet. She looked exhausted but determined. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with copper blonde hair tied back and eyes the same green as Riley's. She wore civilian clothes under a lab coat and spoke with clarity. "If you're seeing this, I'm either dead or worse. I infiltrated Helix to find my daughter, but they found me first. I left the real evidence with the only one who never forgot me, Atlas. He remembers. He always does." The clip ended. Silence. Riley, standing nearby, stared at the screen. Her lips trembled. Then she turned to Atlas, who sat unmoving by her side. "She was there," she whispered. "She tried." The blast had damaged more than just the maintenance wing. In the hours that followed, Camp Howler moved like a wounded animal, its outer perimeter reinforced, surveillance intensified, and communication lines rerouted. Yet, no amount of military readiness could quiet the questions swelling beneath its surface. Who were the architects? What was Project Helix truly for? And why did Sarah Clark say that the answers were hidden in a dog? In the field med bay, Riley refused to leave Atlas's side. He lay resting now, his injured leg wrapped, eyes flickering in half-dreams. The other children slept close together nearby, comforted by his steady presence. Faye Whitlock stood at the doorway, arms crossed, gaze on the German shepherd, whose existence had somehow become the final key to a conspiracy that spanned beyond the fences of any base. "He's not just remembering her," Faye said softly. "He's carrying her." Joelle Lennox joined her, still in tactical gear, a radio clipped to her shoulder. Her usually composed face was furrowed with tension. "How literal do we think Sarah was?" Faye didn't look away. "She said he remembers. That means we're not just talking about behavior. We're talking about data." Sawyer Maddox entered then, face streaked with dust and fatigue. He carried a folder of partially decrypted files recovered by Morales, data fragments from Project Helix. At the top of the stack was a still image of Sarah in the same white-walled lab from the video. In the background, blurry but unmistakable, was a kennel, a number printed above it, K901972, Atlas. Sawyer placed the folder on the table beside Faye. "I want you to look at something. Sarah Clark wasn't just infiltrating Helix. She was part of their research team, before she turned. Her background in neurobiology gave her access no one else had." Lennox stiffened. "You think she implanted something?" Sawyer nodded. "Not physically, neurologically." They moved Atlas into the secure wing of the medical tent, where a portable neuroimaging scanner had been assembled. The equipment had been requisitioned 2 years ago for trauma response, but rarely used. Now it hummed to life as Faye calibrated it over the dog's head. Atlas didn't resist. He simply lifted his eyes to Riley, who whispered, "It's okay, boy. We're finding her." They began the scan. The results were unlike anything anyone expected. In Atlas's long-term memory centers were abnormal neural patterns, loops, anchors, reinforced clusters that bore no resemblance to canine conditioning. Faye stared at the screen, mouth slightly open. She used his recall process to encode information. This is advanced. Emotional memory tied to scent, tone, and visual trigger, like hiding files in a song. Lennox leaned closer. "Can we access it?" Faye hesitated. "Only by recreating the sequence, the same sensory input Sarah used during conditioning. So we need the smells, the sounds, the voice," Sawyer said. They turned to Riley. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice came steady. "She used to sing to him," she said. "Before bedtime. I remember the words." They set the stage in the old barracks, quiet, low-lit, just like Sarah might have used. Morales found a short clip of Sarah reading bedtime stories from Riley's childhood backups on the recovered laptop. Faye mixed scents, lavender, antiseptic, and vanilla from a melted candy bar wrapper Riley remembered her mom always carrying. As the room filled with the stimuli, Riley sat beside Atlas and began to hum, softly at first, then clearer. It wasn't a lullaby. It was an old folk melody, something Irish in origin. The dog's ears twitched. Then he stood. Not fast, not suddenly, but with purpose. He walked slowly across the room to the storage locker where his old vest had been placed. He nudged it once, then again. Sawyer moved forward and pulled it open. Folded inside was the first vest Sarah had given Atlas, back when she was still part of the program. The padding was uneven. Sawyer ran his hand along the inner seam. There was a lump. They cut it open. Inside was a micro-drive sealed in waterproof casing, no larger than a penny. Lennox took it with trembling fingers. The team gathered in the ops tent. Morales plugged the drive into a secure laptop and began decrypting. The files were vast, spanning research logs, medical procedures, shipment records, and, most damning, video testimony from Sarah, recorded over months. In one, she stared directly into the camera. They're mapping neurological obedience, turning trauma into programming. They call it emotional templating. It's not just children. They plan to expand it to soldiers, field operatives, anyone they can stabilize. I saw the initial trials. They worked. But the cost. God, the cost. I hid this in the only soul I trusted. If he's still alive, then there's still a chance. Lennox looked at Sawyer. This isn't just enough for arrests. This is going to bury them. At dawn, federal marshals and intelligence units arrived. Within 24 hours, coordinated raids were launched across 5 states. Black sites were exposed. Names once protected by contracts and classified funding were unmasked, and Project Helix was dismantled. But the wounds would take longer. Later that week, Riley and Sawyer stood beneath the dry cottonwood tree behind the barracks. Atlas sat between them, tail flicking gently against the sand. Riley held a small wooden box. Inside was a photo of her mother, a silver pendant, and the chip they had recovered. "I want to bury it here," she said. Sawyer nodded. They dug quietly. Riley pressed the box into the earth, then sat in silence, her hand resting on Atlas's back. "She saved us," she whispered. Sawyer didn't reply. He just looked out over the ridge where dawn was breaking, and for the first time in months, it felt like something might actually begin again. Sometimes, the smallest spark of loyalty, a wounded dog who refused to forget, a little girl who never stopped believing, a mother who risked everything in silence, can be the vessel of a miracle. What happened at Camp Howler wasn't just a military operation. It was a testimony, a reminder that even in the darkest, most silent corners of the world, God plants courage in the hearts of the forgotten, that he uses the humble, the broken, the unlikely, to break chains others can't see. Atlas didn't just carry Riley, he carried the truth. And somehow, through pain and loss and battlefields no child should walk, love prevailed. In our daily lives, we don't always recognize the miracles. Sometimes they come in the form of a friend who stands by you when no one else will, or a moment of peace after a long storm, or a second chance you didn't know you needed. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone else be reminded that faith can survive even the fire, that there is always light, sometimes carried in 4 legs and a beating heart. Leave a comment and type amen if you believe God still works through the forgotten, the wounded, the brave. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. May God bless you, protect your home, and remind you daily, you are never walking alone.